I realized, much later than I should have, that the face in the painting was mine. At first I only noticed the jacket. It was a small watercolor in a simple wooden frame, hanging alone on a narrow stretch of wall opposite the café counter. I was waiting for my coffee, half listening to the hiss of the machine and the low murmur of a radio, when the faded green of the jacket caught my eye. The color was wrong for the rest of the painting, too modern against the softer browns and grays, and my mind did that automatic thing it does at my age, trying to place it in time. That looks like the jacket I used to wear, I thought. Then I stepped closer, and the thought dropped away, replaced by something sharper, like a small stone in the throat. It was my jacket, not just similar. The same cut, the same slightly crooked pocket flap on the left side where the seamstress in town had mended it back in '93 after I snagged it on a gatepost. The painter had even caught the way it sat wrong across the shoulder, as if it was always on the verge of slipping off. And the man wearing it, sitting on a bench by the sea with his head turned away, his hair thinning on top and graying at the sides, his hands wrapped around a paper cup. If I'd needed any more proof, it was there. I was looking at myself. Not exactly as I am now. I'm 61. In the painting I looked a little younger, late 40s perhaps. But he was close enough that I felt a strange vertigo, like stepping off a curb I did not see. "Your coffee, sir." I turned too quickly and almost knocked into the girl behind the counter. She handed me the cup with a polite smile. "You all right there?" she asked. Yes, fine. Just that painting." I nodded toward it. "Do you know who painted it?" She shook her head. "You'd have to ask Lydia next door. This is hers really. We just borrow the wall. She runs the gallery." I'd lived in the town for 8 months by then. Long enough to know the small gallery next door, not long enough to have gone in. I should have taken my coffee to my usual window table and let the painting be. Instead, I finished the cup in 3 pointless gulps, stepped out into the damp air, and walked the few paces to the gallery door. The bell chimed softly as I went in. White walls, polished floorboards, seascapes and moorland scenes, faces half remembered from around town. The woman behind a box of wrapped frames looked up. Late 50s, perhaps. Gray wool coat on the back of a chair, sleeves rolled up, a pencil tucked into her hair. "Are you Lydia?" I asked. "I am," she said. "And you must be new." "Newish. Peter Harrow. I moved here from Bristol last autumn." She shook my hand. "Welcome, Peter from Bristol. What can I do for you?" "There's a painting in the café. Small watercolor. A man on a bench by the harbor. The label says L.T. And I wondered who that is." Something shifted in her expression. "That one," she said quietly. I wondered when someone would ask. She led me into a smaller back room that smelled of turpentine and coffee. On the far wall hung another watercolor of the same bench, the same green jacket, the same man, this time standing back to us, looking toward the headland. From that angle, there was no mistaking it. The slope of the shoulders, the thinning hair, the way the jacket sat slightly wrong across the back. My posture captured before I had ever seen this town. "You see it," Lydia said. I nodded. "These were painted 10 years ago," she went on. "They've hung around ever since, puzzling me." "Who is L.T.?" I asked. "My daughter, Laura." She hesitated. "She died 9 years ago. Car accident on the A30. She was 23. We sat on the tired little sofa beneath the painting. She told me about going through Laura's studio after the funeral. The stacks of sketchbooks and loose sheets. The way you learn new things about your child when you see what they chose to keep. She reached into a folder on a side table and handed me a page torn from a spiral notebook. At the top, in neat looping capitals, it said, "Man on the bench." The words underneath described a man who sat there every Tuesday between 10 and 11, always with a paper cup from the café, always in the same jacket. Sketches of his back and shoulders crowded the margins. Further down the page, a word had been written and then scratched out so fiercely the paper had torn. Under the ink, I could just make out the curve of father. "No date," I said. "That notebook's from about 10 years ago," Lydia replied. "I remember buying it." She complained about the lines. I've never been to this town before last year, I said slowly. So if the man she watched wasn't me, why does he look so much like me? I've been asking myself that since I first saw you in the cafe, she said. You sit in the same way. You fold your paper in half the same way. It's not just the face. We sat with that tangle for a while. When I made to leave, she took the standing figure painting down from the wall and, after a moment's hesitation, insisted on lending it to me. And the one in the cafe, if you'll take it. Art is meant to move on, she said. Perhaps it will make more sense on your wall than on mine. I walked home in a light drizzle with 2 paintings under my arm and a feeling I had picked up a thread that would not easily be put down. At home, I hung them opposite the sofa. Then I noticed the day, Tuesday. The clock, 10:17. 15 minutes later I was sitting on the real harbor bench, hands folded, staring at the boats, feeling foolish and oddly exposed. The bench, of course, was empty when I arrived. 10 years is a long time, but something in me had shifted. The man in the painting was no longer just an uncanny likeness. He was a question I could not yet name. The next morning I went to the library. The librarian, a man in his 70s whose tie was decorated with small owls, listened to my vague description and pointed me to 2 blue binders. People of the Town Project, he said. We did it about 12 years ago. Local faces, Little Right UPS. Laura did most of the photographs, as it happens. Terribly sad. What happened? Halfway through the second binder, I found him. The photograph showed a man in his early 50s sitting on the harbor bench. Green jacket open, navy jumper, hands on his knees, a small amused smile. My nose more or less. My hairline a few years earlier. The caption read, Michael Lane, 52. Visitor. Comes every year in March. Favorite place in town. This bench. It listens better than most people. The paragraph beneath said he lived in Reading, worked in surveying, came for the air, the light, and to remember things properly. Always stayed at the same guest house near the harbor. And when asked why he kept returning, answered, old promises. The librarian remembered him as the man who sat on the bench, sometimes poring over old newspapers and remarking that he was looking for a name I already know. He also remembered the guest house, Mrs. Foster's, now closed. Mrs. Foster turned out to be a brisk woman with sharp eyes and a kitchen that smelled of baked apples. She remembered Michael at once, and, after a long look at my face, said, You do look a bit like him, skinnier, but round the eyes. There's something. From an old ledger she had never quite thrown away, she unearthed his address in neat block capitals. 17 Beckett Road, Reading. You're not really going to go knocking on some stranger's door, are you? She asked. I honestly don't know, I replied. That evening I sat staring at the slip of paper with the address written in my own hand. I thought of my parents, who had told me when I was 10 that I'd had a brother before me who died as a baby, and then sealed the subject away. I thought of Laura's scratched-out father. I thought of the way the man in the painting sat in my posture in a town I had never visited. The next morning I booked a train. In Reading, Beckett Road was a quiet street of semi-detached houses with small front gardens and bins tucked under hedges. Number 17 had a tired rose bush, a neat line of boots by the door, and drawn curtains. When I knocked, a woman in her 50s with dark hair streaked with gray opened the door a cautious few inches. I'm looking for Michael Lane, I said. I was given this address. My name is Peter Harrow. She studied me for a beat, then opened the door wider. I'm his daughter, she said. Claire, can I ask why you're looking for him? I told her, as simply as I could, that I lived in a small coastal town, that I had found myself in a painting there, that the man in the original painting looked so like me he had stopped me in my tracks, and that his name, according to an old community project, was Michael Lane. And he looks like you? She said, eyebrows raised. I handed her the photocopy of the People of the Town page. He used to wear that jacket everywhere, she said softly. We joked he'd be buried in it. Then she looked up at me properly and flinched, just slightly. My God, she murmured. Yes, around the eyes. She told me, once we were in her small living room with mugs of tea between us, that Michael had died 8 years earlier. Heart attack sudden in the back garden. A neighbor saw him fall. On the mantelpiece a later photograph of him. Late 50s, less hair, checked shirt. Reinforced the resemblance without quite tipping into identity. Claire explained that he'd been adopted as a baby in the early 60s. Her grandparents were kind people, but the past was a blank. As an adult, he had quietly started to search. Adoption agencies, old files, the patchy records of another era. In the end, he'd got little more than a name. His birth mother's. Eleanor Turner, she said. He used to say he'd come into my grandparents' lives, like a parcel with no return address. He made a joke of it, but I could tell it bothered him. She fetched a thin folder from a bureau. Inside were photocopied documents and a single black and white photograph of a young woman sitting on a low stone wall by the sea, hair dark, smile wide. I recognized the wall. The path to the headland above our harbor has one just like it. And there was something oddly familiar in the woman's eyes. I think I know where this was taken, I said, and who it might lead us to. Among the photocopies, in Michael's careful hand, a note in the margin caught my eye. Eleanor T. Connection to LT? Lydia? Check. L.T. Again. Lydia's daughter, Laura Turner. It was not a neat explanation, but it was the beginning of one. A birth mother named Eleanor Turner, a daughter named Lydia who had grown up in our town, a granddaughter named Laura who had painted a man on a bench that somehow mattered to her, and a son named Michael who had been adopted out and then, decades later, found his way back to the harbor he had been born above. Do you have any brothers or sisters? I asked Claire. No, she said. Only me. Mum couldn't have more. She gave a small, humorless laugh. Dad used to joke they'd put all their energy into getting me right first time. Now I wonder if he was thinking about the ones he didn't grow up with. She asked about my family. I told her about my parents, Alan and Margaret, their marriage, my birth in 1964, the unnamed baby boy, before you came, who had died in 1961. You can see why it crossed my mind, I said, that perhaps your father and my brother were the same child, told differently in two family stories. She could. But there were gaps we could not fill there and then. Whatever the exact lines, she said at last. Dad kept coming back to your town. He sat on that bench. He talked with a girl with a camera. He said he was keeping an old promise. It sounds as if he found something there, even if he never quite stepped through the door. We agreed that afternoon that she would come to the coast one day soon, and that before that happened, I owed Lydia the truth as far as we could know it. Back in town, in the quiet of the gallery's back room, I laid the photocopied birth certificate and the photograph of the young woman on the low wall in front of Lydia. She read the name Eleanor Turner, the year 1942, the place of birth not far from where I had grown up rather than where she had. Then she looked long at the photograph. My mother had a picture just like this, she said slowly. Same wall, same dress. Only the writing on the back says, Eleanor Jenkins, summer 62. She married my father later that year. When I was little, she used to joke that the registrar drank too much cider and kept muddling her names. Only now, staring at the official paper in front of her, the joke no longer sounded charming. She told me how, after her father died, she'd found hints in his desk of a baby before her. A boy. Her mother had eventually called him stillborn, then closed down again. But if this is my mother, she said, tapping the certificate, then he wasn't stillborn. He was my brother. And he was taken. It was a hard thing to say aloud. Harder to hear. We sat in silence, each imagining a young woman in that summer dress on the stone wall, being told by earnest strangers what was and was not possible for someone like her in 1961. He found you, I said gently, or at least the edge of you. He found this town, this harbor, that bench. He found Laura. He came as close as he could. But he never knocked on my door, she replied. I would have made him tea. I would have asked him about his life. There is a part of me that is furious with him for not giving me that. And perhaps furious with your mother for not telling you earlier, I added. She nodded once. I am trying very hard not to be, she said. She was young. It was a different time. but I cannot pretend it doesn't hurt. Then she looked at me properly. And you, Peter? Where do you sit in all this? I told her about my parents' lost baby, about my own nagging suspicion that perhaps my family, too, had been drawn into that tangle decades ago, about Claire's folder and Michael's careful note in the margin linking Eleanor T. to L.T. and to her. There's a chance, I said carefully, that Michael and I share more than a passing resemblance, or there may be nothing between us but coincidence and a hungry imagination. Either way, he led me here. She sat with that for a moment, then said the only thing that really mattered. Would you bring his daughter here? We chose a bright day in May. I met Claire at the station, and together we walked down the hill to the harbor. The town was fuller than usual, all children and ice creams and brisk dogs. In the gallery, Lydia looked up from some paperwork as we came in. I watched her expression change as she saw Claire. You must be Lydia, Claire said. I must, Lydia replied, coming around the desk. And you are? Claire Lane, Michael's daughter. The room seemed to contract around those words. For a heartbeat or two, no one spoke. I am very pleased to meet you, Claire, Lydia said at last. I only wish. She left the rest unsaid. They both knew. On the harbor bench, Claire instinctively chose the left-hand end. He always favored that side, Lydia said quietly. Closer to the boats. Claire let her hand rest on the worn wood. Did he talk about us? She asked. Me. My mum. Once, Lydia said. He said he had a daughter who thought he was mysterious on purpose, when really he was just quiet. He hoped you'd forgive him for not being as straightforward as you deserve. Claire huffed a laugh that was half-sob. That sounds like him, she said. He could turn making toast into a philosophical exercise. They spoke about Laura, about the sketchbooks, about the way Laura had written father and then crossed it out, about the courage it takes to look steadily at someone without quite knowing why they matter to you. At one point Claire said, I'm angry with him, for not knocking, for not telling me what he found. And I'm angry with my mother, Lydia replied, for not telling me I had a brother, and with myself for not asking better questions. They did not ask each other to excuse those angers. They simply laid them side by side and let them be what they were. When Lydia asked if I was angry with anyone, I found I was not exactly. Sad, yes. Sad that my father had felt he could not speak of the baby they lost. Sad that Eleanor had carried a silence for the rest of her life. Sad that Michael had sat on that bench, listening to boats instead of footsteps at his sister's door. Sad that Laura had written a word she might have had a right to use and then torn it out of the page. What I want, I said, is not to let their silences dictate ours. They both looked at me then with something that felt, for the first time, like recognition rather than scrutiny. The three of us fell into a kind of rhythm after that. Claire came back a few times over the summer, staying in a small bed and breakfast up the hill. She and Lydia spent long afternoons in the gallery's back room, going through Laura's work. Sometimes I joined them. Sometimes I sat on the bench and let the sound of halyards clinking against masts fill the gaps between what we knew and what we would never know. When my daughter, Anna, visited with her sons, I told her the story in small, manageable pieces. The painting, the man who looked like me, the folder in reading, the suggestion of a brother who had never quite been named. Do you want them to be family? She asked, meaning Lydia and Claire, as we watched the boys argue about which gull was the biggest. I think they already are, I said, in their own way, not by paperwork, by choice. She smiled at that and, after a suitable amount of teasing about my late-life social blossoming, asked when she could meet them. The last solid piece of information arrived in late October, in the form of a letter from the records office where I'd written months before, asking about my parents' lost child. We can confirm, it said, that the male child born to Alan and Margaret Harrow on March 12, 1961 was stillborn and that no adoption took place. So Michael was not my brother by blood. The baby my parents had mourned had indeed died before he had a chance to be given away. Their silence, clumsy as it had been wrapped around a real loss. When I showed the letter to Lydia and Claire, we all sat for a moment, letting that settle. Part of me's disappointed, Claire admitted. A secret uncle would have been quite something. But mostly I'm relieved. At least Dad wasn't hiding another family from us. It changes less than you'd think, Lydia said. He is still my brother, whether we share blood or not. He was the child my mother couldn't keep and the man who came back as close as he dared. And you, she nodded to me, would not be sitting here if he hadn't looked something like you. Blood's only one way lives braid together, she added. Sometimes it's the questions we share that make us kin. We decided, in that quiet living room with the envelope on the table, that whatever the official records said, we would keep turning up for one another. Eating soup at each other's tables. Swapping stories. Remembering things properly, together. Now, some evenings, I sit on my sofa with the lights low and look at the two watercolors on the wall. The man in the green jacket sitting, and the same man standing back to us, looking out to sea. Between them hangs a small framed print of Laura's notebook page headed "Man on the Bench." The line where she once wrote, "Father," now a neat, clean tear. I no longer see myself first when I look at him. I see Michael, a man who came here every March to sit with an absence he could not name. A man whose quiet promise to himself, "I will keep coming back. I will keep looking," brought three strangers into the same room years after he died. And yet, inevitably, I still see myself too. Not in the nose or the hairline, but in the act of returning. In the decision, even late in life, to sit down on a particular bench and face whatever rises up out of the water. The mystery never resolved into a clever twist. It widened instead into something gentler. The realization that our parents' choices shape us, but they do not finish us. That secrets kept for complicated reasons can, eventually, be met with compassion. That even at 61 you can find new people to care about and be cared for by, if you are willing to follow the odd threads life offers you. Not long ago, on a clear, cold afternoon, we all ended up at the harbor bench together. Anna with her boys, Claire with her careful smile, Lydia with a sketchbook she never quite opened. The boys argued about pirates. Turner, Lydia's cat, sat under the bench looking unimpressed. Someone's radio played a song I half remembered from my 20s. "You did a good thing, Dad," Anna said quietly as we watched the others. "You could have walked past that painting and never asked about it." "I almost did," I said. "More than once." Sometimes, it turns out, the smallest decision not to look away can change the way the rest of your life feels when you wake up in the morning. As the light thinned and the air turned sharper, we drifted back up the hill to our separate houses. Lydia fell into step beside me. "If Laura were here," she said, "she'd be furious she missed this. All these faces in one place. She'd have filled 3 sketchbooks before supper." "Then we'll have to do our best without her," I said. "Leave a few pages blank in case she finds a way to add to them." She slipped her arm briefly through mine, just for balance on the slope, then let it go. "Perhaps we already are," she said. We walked on, the sound of the sea behind us, the paintings waiting on our walls, proof that the past can reach into the present not only with shadows, but with unexpected light. And if you have listened this far, walking through harbor streets and quiet rooms and small discoveries with us, I hope you will stay for more stories like this. If you feel like it, you can subscribe to Ellen Bedtime Tales, so you do not miss the next slow mystery we unfold together. And you are warmly invited to share in the comments where you are listening from in the world. Sometimes, knowing where you are helps us remember how many different harbors a single story can reach.